All right, fourth grade, we are going to be finding some volume today. Now, this may or may not be a word that you have ever heard before. Most of you are probably very familiar with your mom saying, "Turn down that volume, it's too loud." But this is not the type of volume that we are going to be talking about today. We are going to be talking about it in a mathematical sense of the word. So the goal for today is to be able to find the volume of a rectangular prism. This shape right here is a rectangular prism. We know that it is a rectangular prism because it is a 3D shape and it has two different bases. So the first thing we need to do in order to find volume is figure out what volume is. How can we find it if we don't know what it is? Well, volume is the amount of space within a 3D object. That's important to note, that volume is in a 3D object. So I have two shapes down here. One of them is a 2D shape and one of them is a 3D shape. I'm sure you would all agree with me that this square is a 2D shape and this cube would be a 3D shape. We know a 2D shape is flat, and a 3D shape it has depth, it has height. It's not something that is flat. We think of 2D as flat and 3D as something that is not flat. So an example of a 2D shape could maybe be a piece of paper. An example of a 3D shape would be maybe one of the bricks that are on your house, or one of your little brothers or sisters' blocks that they play with. Those would be examples of 3D shapes. So we know that the amount of space within a 2D shape, we can find that. We know that's something called area. And we know how to find the area of a shape. We do base times height, or length times width, to find the amount of space within a 2D shape. Well, volume is the amount of space within a 3D shape, and there's a special way that we're going to solve that. So here we have the steps to find volume. So we have a shape, and the first thing we're going to do is measure the length and the width and multiply them together. Now, I like to just look at the very bottom of this shape. I'm not going to look at the whole thing. I'm going to look at this bottom row going across the length and its width. So across the bottom, I see 3. So I would do 3 times 2. That's my length, that's my width. 3 times 2 is 6. Okay, then I'm going to figure out how many layers tall my shape is, and this we are going to call the height. So I have 1 layer, 2 layers, 3 layers. Okay, I have 3 layers tall, and then I'm going to multiply the first number by the second number. So the first number I got was a 6, the second number I got was a 3. I'm going to do 6 times 3 and get 18. This would be the volume of this shape, or the amount of space inside this shape. There are 18 blocks in this shape. On the very first layer, there are 6 blocks. On the second layer, there are 6 blocks, and on the third layer, there are 6 blocks. Add those 6's together and we get 18. So now there is a formula to find volume. The formula to find volume is length times width times height. This is going to be a very important formula for us so that we're able to understand how to find volume of different shapes. So whenever we are finding area, we do length times width times height. This 3 told us the length. The 2 told us the width. We multiplied those together. And then we multiplied by the height. So this is the formula to find volume. Okay, let's take a look at another example. So we have this shape. This is another rectangular prism, and it's giving me some measurements here. I know that this line across is 8, this line is 3, and it's 5 tall. So I need to figure out what is my length, what is my width, and what is my height. So it looks like my length is going to be 8. Length is across. My width is 3. And we all know height is how tall, It would be 5 layers tall. And now I could find the volume. Well, if we look back at that other slide, we know that we find volume by doing length times width times height. So I could do length times width. Well, I already know that 8 times 3 is 24. And then I need to do 24 times 5. I've multiplied my length and width. Now I need to multiply that by 5. Let's see. I think I'm going to use partial products to solve this. So I know that 5 times 4 is 20. And then I know that 5 times 20 is 100. And then with partial products, we're going to add those two numbers together. 100 plus 20 is 120. Now, how do we label the answer for volume? We know with area, we use square units, square inches, square centimeters. Well, with volume, we're going to use cubed units. Cubed is another word for, it means 3 times in math. Well, look at how many things we multiplied by. We multiplied 3 numbers. So since we used inches 3 times, we're going to measure in inches cubed, or in cubed inches. So to show that, I'm going to make my inches, and then I'm going to put a little 3 up here, and that lets me know there were 3 inches, 1 for the length, 1 for the width, and 1 for the height. So whenever we measure volume, we measure it in cubed inches. Okay, let's take a look at some that are a little bit tougher. Okay, so here we have kind of a chart. I guess I could draw some lines so we know each one is separate. And we are going to have to solve for some missing numbers to find volume. Now, for most of them, we have volume. We're going to start at the bottom, and we know that the formula to find volume is length times width times height. Well, look, in this bottom example, I have my length, my width, and my height. I can go ahead and multiply these 3 together to find my volume. Well, 5 times 2 is 10. And then 10 times 5 is 50. I could say that the volume here is 50. All right, let's look at the next one. This one's a little bit tougher. I already know the volume. I know my height. I know my length, but what is the width? How could I figure this out? Let's turn to a blank page. We know length is 4. The width is what we don't know. The height was 2, and the volume is 32. Okay. Well, we know that to find volume, we do length times width times height. So I'm going to plug in what I already know. Well, I know my length is 4. I don't know my width. I do know my height. And I do know my volume. Okay, so I have this filled in with what I know so far. Now I need to figure out what is the width. Well, I'm going to go ahead and multiply together the 2 numbers that I do have. So 4 times 2 is going to give me 8. But I still don't know my width. But I do know that this together equals 32. That's my volume. So now I need to figure out the width. How could I figure out what that W is? Well, I know 8 times something is going to give me 32. Well, I could do 32 divided by 8, and I know that 32 divided by 8 is 4, and I know that 8 times 4 is 32. I'm going to go ahead and say that my width is equal to 4. Now I could check and make sure this makes sense. Well, 4 times 4 is 16, times 2 is 32. Well, that would give me my volume of 32, so I think I can go ahead and say that my volume here is 32 because I know that the width is 4. All right, hopefully you have learned about how to find volume. What I would like for you to do is to solve these last two up here. You're going to need to figure out what is the height and what is the length so that we can get the correct volume. Have a great night.